What if the most desolate, bone-chilling wasteland on our planet isn't a natural wonder, but the world's largest crime scene? For centuries, the finest cartographers in the world mapped the far north not as a block of ice, but as a temperate, navigable waterway known as the Tartarian Ocean. Then, almost overnight, the maps changed. The lush islands vanished. The vibrant ports were scrubbed from the record, and a white void was painted over the top of our world. They tell us the Arctic has been frozen for millions of years. But the evidence suggests a much darker reality. Did nature reclaim the North, or was the Arctic Ocean weaponized to bury the remains of a global superpower? Welcome back. Today, we are venturing into the coldest corners of the map to uncover a truth that has been hidden under layers of ice and propaganda for over a century. In the world of alternative history, we often talk about the Great Reset, a period in the mid-19th century where the timeline of humanity was allegedly rewritten. Central to this mystery is the disappearance of Grand Tartaria, a massive global empire that appears on nearly every map prior to 1850, only to vanish into the shadows of the Russian Empire and the Soviet Union. But while many look for Tartaria in the mud-floored streets of old European cities, a growing group of researchers is looking further north. They believe the Arctic is a modern invention. Look at the antique globes. You won't see a white cap, you'll see a thriving green maritime hub where the Tartarian Ocean once flowed freely. The thesis is simple, but terrifying. The Arctic is not a million-year-old ice sheet. It is an artificial, 200-year-old deep freeze designed to seal off the heart of a fallen civilization. If you ask a mainstream historian, they'll tell you the North has always been an inaccessible desert. However, their own timeline has massive, undeniable holes. The official narrative of the Arctic is built on a foundation of heroic discovery. We are taught about explorers like Willem Barents in 1596 and Henry Hudson, brave men who supposedly battled eternal ice to find a passage that didn't exist. Later in the 1890s, Fridtjof Nansen's Fram expedition purportedly proved that the Arctic was a deep, frozen basin. By the time Robert Peary claimed to reach the pole in 1909, the image of a permanent ancient ice cap was set in stone. But when you look closer at the records, the official timeline begins to fracture. There are red flags everywhere, and the first one is the impossible accuracy of early maps. Take a look at the Mercator 1606 map of the North Pole. It doesn't show a flat sheet of ice. It depicts 4 massive islands separated by 4 flowing rivers, all converging at a central mountain called the Rupes Nigra. Mainstream science tells us the Arctic has been frozen for over 2 million years. If that's true, how did Gerardus Mercator map the specific topography of the ocean floor and land masses that were supposedly buried under miles of ice? He wasn't guessing. He was copying earlier records from a time when the Tartarian Ocean was open water, and he wasn't the only one who believed the North was accessible. Fast forward to the mid-19th century. We find a massive contradiction in the records of the Royal Geographical Society. During the 1850s, the leading scientific minds of the day were obsessed with a theory called the open polar sea. Explorers like Elisha Kent Kane didn't just speculate, they reported seeing open, ice-free water beyond the northern ice barriers. They described a temperate climate where there should have been a frozen death trap. If the Arctic has been an ice block since the dawn of man, why were the world's top scientists convinced they could sail a ship straight to the pole as recently as 170 years ago? Then we have the suspicious timeline of the freezing. Between 1815 and 1850, a series of bizarre climate anomalies struck the Earth. This is the exact window when Grand Tartaria begins to fade from the history books. The most famous event was the year without a summer in 1816. Officially, it was caused by the eruption of Mount Tambora. But researchers noticed something strange. The cooling wasn't just a temporary dip. In the decades following 1816, the northern maps were radically revised. The lush islands disappeared. The Tartarian Ocean was rebranded as the Arctic Ocean, and suddenly it was declared impenetrable. It feels less like a natural shift and more like a strategic pivot, a global effort to enforce a frozen narrative and prevent independent exploration of what lay beyond the ice. If the official story is full of holes, the documents left behind by the Tartarians themselves provide a much more chilling alternative. To find the truth, we have to look at the documents that survived the Great Archival Purges. The most striking piece of evidence is the Urbano Monte map of 1587. This isn't just a map, it's a massive, 10-foot-wide masterpiece of 16th-century cartography. When you examine the North Pole on Monte's map, you won't find a barren wasteland. You see mountains, lush vegetation, flowing rivers, and even animals. Most skeptics argue that Monte was simply filling in the blanks with his imagination. But here is the problem with that logic. Monte's map accurately depicts the coastlines of South America and Africa with startling precision. If he was a master of geographic reality for the rest of the world, why would he suddenly switch to pure fantasy at the North Pole? Perhaps he was drawing what was actually there. Or consider the Encyclopaedia Britannica. If you can track down a first edition from 1771, you'll find a version of history that has been scrubbed from modern classrooms. In those pages, Tartary isn't a vague ethnic term. It is listed as a massive sovereign country, the largest in the world, spanning almost all of northern Asia. And what body of water sits at its northern border? It isn't the Arctic, it is the Tartarian Ocean. The transition from this Tartarian Ocean to a frozen Arctic corresponds perfectly with a period of global catastrophe. We have to talk about the year 1816, the year without a summer. The official story says the eruption of Mount Tambora in Indonesia threw so much ash into the atmosphere that it blocked out the sun, causing crops to fail across North America and Europe. But alternative researchers suggest a much more localized and intentional event. They point to the flash freeze evidence found in the Siberian permafrost. We aren't just talking about cold weather, we are talking about a thermal collapse. Think about the frozen mammoths discovered in the Siberian tundra. These animals were found perfectly preserved, some still standing upright, with undigested tropical vegetation in their stomachs. For a mammoth to freeze so quickly that the food in its stomach doesn't rot, the temperature would have to drop from a temperate state to nearly minus 100 degrees Fahrenheit almost instantly. No volcanic winter can cause a localized flash freeze of that magnitude. It requires a catastrophic atmospheric event. Some researchers believe this was the fallout of a weaponized atmospheric reset, a deliberate cooling of the northern hemisphere to bury Tartaria's coastal infrastructure. Imagine a civilization with massive stone ports and advanced maritime technology living along the northern coast of Russia. If you wanted to erase them from history, you wouldn't just invade them, you would freeze them. By triggering a sudden shift in the atmospheric pressure or using advanced frequency technology, the old world order could have turned the Tartarian Ocean into a permanent graveyard of ice in a single season. This would explain why 19th-century explorers were so confused. They were operating on maps that were only a few decades old, showing open water, only to arrive and find a wall of ice that shouldn't have been there. It also explains the mud flood phenomenon. If you flash freeze the north, the displaced moisture and the shifting of the tectonic plates would cause massive floods of liquefied earth to sweep across the remaining Tartarian cities further south. The mud buried the first floors of the buildings, and the ice buried the entire northern heartland. What was once the center of global trade became a forbidden zone of ice and snow. They didn't just change the weather, they erased the very possibility of Tartaria's survival. They turned a thriving maritime empire into a frozen desert and told us it had been that way for millions of years. But if Tartaria was truly a global power, they wouldn't have just lived on the coast. They would have built deep into the interior, and the ruins they left behind are still visible today, if you know where to look. This wasn't just a change in weather. It was the erasure of a global superpower. And the evidence of their advanced technology is hidden in plain sight. If the Tartarian Ocean was once a navigable maritime hub, then the implications are staggering. We aren't just talking about a few fishing boats. We are talking about the primary trade route of the ancient world. The geography of Grand Tartaria suggests an empire that didn't just exist in isolation. It sat at the crossroads of the East and the West, using the northern waters to bypass the treacherous journeys through the southern capes. But how did a civilization survive in what we now consider the harshest climate on Earth? The answer lies in the architecture they left behind, structures that make no sense in the context of the official frontier history. Deep in the Siberian wilderness, researchers have identified hundreds of star forts. These are geometrically perfect, multi-layered fortifications that require advanced knowledge of mathematics and ballistics to construct. According to mainstream history, these regions were inhabited by nomadic tribes and simple fur trappers. Why would the Russian Empire build some of the most complex military structures in human history in the middle of a frozen wasteland? The truth is, they didn't. They inherited them. Some researchers believe these forts weren't even built for defense, but were part of a massive global energy grid. Look at the city of Omsk or Tomsk. When you see photos from the late 19th century, you see Greco-Roman columns, massive domes, and neoclassical facades that look like they belong in the center of Paris or London. We are told these were built by pioneers using horse-drawn carriages and primitive hand tools in a land where the ground is frozen solid for 9 months of the year. Does that sound plausible? Or does it look like the southern outposts of a much larger civilization that extended all the way to the North Pole? This leads us to the free energy theory. If you look at the spires and domes on these Tartarian buildings, you'll notice they are often topped with intricate metal antennas or finials. There is a growing belief that these weren't just religious ornaments. They were devices designed to harvest atmospheric electricity, etheric energy drawn directly from the ionosphere. This would have provided Tartaria with a clean, limitless power source, allowing them to heat their cities and maintain a temperate climate even as the planet began to, naturally. Cool. But what if this energy grid was sabotaged? Imagine a global network of power that kept the Tartarian Ocean warm through artificial means. If a rival group, the ancestors of what we now call the global elite, managed to trigger a catastrophic failure or an intentional overload of this grid, the results would be apocalyptic. The atmospheric collapse would have caused the moisture in the air to instantly crystallize. The flash freeze that killed the mammoths wasn't a freak accident, it was a total system failure. The ensuing chaos is what researchers call the Great Reset. Between 1850 and 1920, the winners of this conflict, primarily the British and Russian empires, moved in to clean up the ruins. They found cities half buried in mud and coastal ports encased in ice. Instead of telling the truth, they rewrote the history books. They turned the sovereign nation of Tartary into a mere geographic descriptor. They told the survivors that they were primitive and that the grand buildings they lived in were actually built by their new imperial masters. By claiming the Arctic was an eternal, frozen wasteland, They ensured that no one would ever go looking for the sunken ruins of the Tartarian capital cities. Think about the sheer scale of the deception. If you can convince a population that an entire ocean has always been frozen, you can hide anything beneath that ice. You can hide advanced technology. You can hide the records of a unified human history. And most importantly, you can hide the fact that energy was once free for everyone. The old world order established a monopoly on energy through fossil fuels. They couldn't have people discovering a civilization that powered itself using the very air they breathed. So, they froze the North. They called it the Arctic. They invented a history of slow, agonizing exploration to make it seem like the region was a mystery being unlocked for the first time. In reality, they were just visiting a graveyard. They were salvaging what they could and burying the rest under a narrative of discovery. But the winners of that war didn't just stop at rewriting the past. They created a modern system of suppression to make sure the ice stays exactly where it is, at least in the public's mind. You might think this is all a collection of old stories and what-if scenarios. But the suppression of the North isn't just a historical event. It is happening right now, in real time, through our modern institutions. Why is it that in an age of commercial space travel and instant communication, the poles remain the most restricted and censored places on the planet? What are they so afraid we might see if we flew a plane directly over the center of the frozen ocean? If the Arctic is just a natural, frozen wilderness, then why is it treated like a top-secret military installation? In our modern world of instant global travel, there is one massive anomaly that few people stop to question: the flight paths. Have you ever wondered why high-altitude commercial flights almost never cross directly over the North Pole? We are told it is due to magnetic interference or a lack of emergency landing strips. But in an era of advanced satellite navigation and triple redundant aircraft systems, those excuses feel increasingly hollow. Some researchers believe the restriction exists to prevent civilians from seeing the truth, that the central ice cap isn't a solid mass at all. What if those 4 massive land masses from the Mercator maps are still there? What if the Arctic isn't a solid block of ice, but a ring of ice surrounding a navigable, temperate zone that they don't want us to find? The digital world provides even more suspicious clues. Open up Google Earth and try to get a high-resolution look at the geographic North Pole. You'll notice a strange patchwork effect. The imagery becomes blurry, distorted, or is replaced by a low-resolution graphic that looks like a bad Photoshop job. Why is it that we can zoom in on a backyard in suburban Ohio and see a lawnmower, but the most strategically important region for climate science is a pixelated mess? The censorship isn't just digital, it's physical. The Russian government has been quietly increasing its military presence across the Siberian coastline for decades. Official reports claim they are protecting resource interests, but local reports tell a different story. As the permafrost melts, it is revealing things that shouldn't exist. Take the Potomsky crater in Irkutsk. It's a massive, anomalous mound of crushed limestone that looks like a nest with an egg in the middle. Mainstream geologists are baffled. They've suggested everything from a meteorite to a gas pocket. But local legends say it's a place of fire linked to the sky. When researchers brought sensitive equipment to the site, they detected a massive, metallic object buried deep beneath the crater. An object that produces a magnetic field so strong it interferes with electronic devices. Is this a piece of Tartarian technology, a remnant of the energy grid that once kept this region warm? And it isn't just craters. As the deep freeze begins to thaw, workers in Siberian mines have reported finding anomalous metal objects, perfectly machined spheres and pipes embedded in coal seams that are supposedly millions of years old. Every time a significant discovery is made, the area is cordoned off by security forces and the evidence disappears into state-run laboratories. They tell us the ice is melting because of our carbon footprint. But what if the thaw is simply the natural end of an artificial cycle? What if the atmospheric reset of the 1800s is finally wearing off, and the true geography of the Tartarian Ocean is about to be revealed? The global elite are in a race against time. They need to maintain the Arctic narrative even as the ice literally slips through their fingers. Because if we knew what was really under that ice, the ruins of a free energy civilization and the evidence of a global deception, the entire foundation of our modern world would crumble in an afternoon. They benefit from our ignorance. They benefit from a world where energy is expensive and history is a lie. But as the world warms, the tombstone of Tartaria is beginning to crack. You might be wondering why any of this matters today. Why does a frozen ocean or a vanished empire from the 1800s affect your life in the 21st century? The answer is simple: power. Those who control the past control the future, and those who control our energy sources control our every move. By rebranding the Tartarian Ocean as the Arctic, the winners of the Great Reset did more than just hide a civilization. They monopolized the world's resources. Today, the Arctic is estimated to hold nearly 1/4 of the world's undiscovered oil and gas. By convincing us it was always a wasteland, they ensured these Tartarian resources would be managed by a select few corporations and governments. But there is a deeper layer to this. We are currently living through a period of intense focus on climate change. We are told the melting of the Arctic ice is a man-made disaster. But what if global warming is actually the Great Thaw? What if the ice is melting because the artificial atmospheric reset of the 19th century is finally reaching its expiration date? If the ice disappears, the ruins of the old world, the ports, the star forts, and the free energy towers will be visible to everyone with a satellite connection. Is the current push for environmental protection and restricted green zones in the north actually a plan to cordoning off the evidence before we can see it? If the public realizes that humanity once lived in a world with free energy and a temperate climate at the poles, the scarcity model of our modern economy would vanish. Overnight, losing Tartaria meant losing our identity as a technologically advanced, unified species. We were downgraded from masters of the atmosphere to slaves of the power grid. The Arctic narrative is the glue holding that lie together. It tells us that progress is linear, that we are at the peak of human achievement. But when you look at the majestic ruins buried in the Siberian mud, you have to ask, are we the most advanced generation? Or are we just the ones living in the wreckage of a much greater world? The ice is melting, and the truth is rising to the surface. It's time to put the pieces together. We have been conditioned to look at the top of our globes and see a white void, a place where life goes to die. But the evidence tells a different story. We have 16th century maps showing a green, vibrant north. We have 19th century explorers swearing they saw an open sea. And we have the ghost of a vanished empire called Tartaria, a global superpower that once called that ocean its own. They didn't just name it the Arctic to describe the cold. They named it the Arctic to bury a civilization. The frozen north isn't a natural wonder, it's a tombstone. The question is no longer if they lied to us, but how much longer they can keep the truth under ice. Go look at the 1771 Britannica for yourself. Study the Urbano Monte map and ask yourself, why are the poles the only places on Earth we aren't allowed to truly explore? If you found this deep dive intriguing, Hit the like button and subscribe to join us as we peel back the layers of our hidden history. What do you think is waiting for us as the ice melts? Leave a comment below. The truth isn't just out there, it's under the ice. Stay curious,